Hello and welcome to B2B Growth Jump. I'm your host, Tony from LandingRabbit. In this episode, I'm joined by Arnold, founder at Screenshotbot. We're going to discuss why Arnold decided to go from developer roles at Meta and Google to a startup founder, how to sell to technical teams, and why Screenshotbot decided to go for open source. Let's dive in. Hi, Arnold. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation.
Thanks for joining. To give some context to people that are listening or watching this episode, what inspired you to build a Screenshotbot and what are your typical customers?
Sure. So I've been working in the screenshot testing space for a while, even before I started doing startups. I was working at Meta and I built a screenshot testing infrastructure at Meta. I built the first screenshot testing library on Android. So that's really what got me into the space. When I left Meta, my intention was to never look at screenshot testing ever again. And I started working on some other startups. But eventually I looked back and I looked at the space and realized that mobile teams outside of Meta were missing this critical tooling piece. And so I thought I already knew what people needed. So it just made sense that I work on it. A big part of startups is validating your product. In this case, I knew what the product needed to be. So it just made my life a lot easier.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Many founders start from their experience. They might think when they're working on something that I'm not gonna work on this because I'm so bored with the
Right.
topic. I've had that a couple of times, but it's great when you actually know what to build and you have some of the contacts you can ask people that are also in the similar place. So yeah, helps a ton. What are the typical problems you mentioned that the Meta, Google, they have maybe a bit more sophisticated processes than many other companies, but what are the typical problems that your customers are facing?
But so people don't fully when they hit these issues, they don't fully understand the scale of the issues. The first issue that most people will understand. So to give context for viewers, what screenshot testing is, if you have some kind of a web app or a mobile app, and if you make a UI change, you want to see what that looks like. You can manually go test it and open it up, but then you have to check it in different responsive layouts. What bigger companies tend to do is they do something called screenshot test, where they will write a test. It tends to be a fast unit test, not an integration test, that will render the view in many different configurations like dark mode, light mode, different screen widths, generates images. And when any of those image changes, they'll let you know that something has changed. But the way they do it is they will save these screenshots in their Git repository. Now, as you can imagine, this can explode quite quickly and your Git repository becomes really big. There are some workarounds for it, but then it really is like a hacky fix. And so people don't really scale up their screenshot testing because they hit a point after which they have to decide, should I include the screenshot test or not? Is there a value for this? But the moment you add that little piece of friction for developers, they're just going to avoid doing it completely. They don't want that. They don't want to make a decision like, do I want to add this test or not? They just want to add the test if they have value for it. So what we enable is, first of all, we enable that the scaling up your screenshot testing. There's a bunch of other little things. There's issues with recording your screenshot test manually on your developer laptop, and then the images that are generated in the CI tend to be different. There's the review workflow. Right now, a lot of smaller teams, each time they make a UI change, they're going to run their tests locally on their laptop to regenerate the screenshots, right? So this can take several minutes. So you're manually running those tests each time you make a UI change. So you're doing this multiple times a day. So that's slowing people down. And so we solve all of these. These are the different kinds of problems people have. A lot of people developers I talk to don't recognize these as problems yet just because they haven't seen the alternative. But if they've come from a bigger company like Meta or Google, they have internal tooling to solve this stuff. So those people usually tend to realize that, okay, there's a better way of doing things.
Yeah, often when you're selling business to business tools, tech tools, you have an audience, but they don't necessarily recognize that there is a problem. I've faced that. And I actually think that the best audience are those that are, or often are those that are not the ones that kind of feel a pain and problem. They're the ones that are like, okay, I really want to improve this process. They recognize themselves that, okay, this could be improved. It's not necessarily like like a super high pain, and they might avoid it, like you said, that they might actually skip testing. You're fairly active on LinkedIn. What's your kind of like sales and marketing model at the moment? How are you selling and marketing the tool?
So I do a lot of mobile conferences. It's actually, interestingly enough, it's not the tech conferences are not so much about getting sales, although that does happen too. But a lot of it is about understanding the language that developers are speaking, because that keeps changing. So it's a really great place to have these conversations with people, and then they will ask me a specific question, and I realize, well, developers are thinking this way, so maybe I need to change my marketing so that this is somewhere right at the top, so that people understand what the product is more easily. I have had some sales coming from the conference channels, generally as positive ROI. But I think the bigger value from the conferences tend to be just understanding how the market thinks. Most of the customers that we have come from, do I want to say inbound? Yeah, it is inbound. I have like few Reddit comments sprinkled here and there, some GitHub comments here, and then people will see that comment because they're searching for a specific problem. So these are like, you know, high value in the sense that these people do have the problem and they see my comment and they ping me. That's currently the biggest marketing channel. I've tried other things. I've tried Google Ads. I'm trying it again, but not much success. LinkedIn is mostly LinkedIn strategy is more like, if something comes to my mind, I just write it. That's really it. I mean, obviously I make sure I'm saying the right things for the marketing purposes. Even if it's a small thought that comes in my head, I just write it. And I don't think too much about it, because the moment I think too much, then I'm like, that feels too salesy. I don't want to write that. So I just write it and then forget about it. Sometimes people sometimes people respond to it well. Sometimes it's all crickets. Yeah, I can't control that. That's generally my marketing. I'm not super great at it. I used to have, for a couple of years, I used to have a sales coach. She was great. Like it's like having a sales team while I'm still doing everything myself. So she would help me understand the perspective of selling, like from how the buyers are thinking about things. So she really helped. But apart from that, not much of a structured process, I would say.
I follow roughly the same for LinkedIn. I don't really plan them that much. I write them usually during weekend or something, but they're like just thoughts. I have a couple of posts every now and then that has a bit more thinking behind. It might be like very product related, and then I create a video or so. But yeah, other than that, I like to just keep it as a natural channel and kind of like a diary of my thoughts. Sales and marketing to developers is quite different. What are some of the tips that you could share if someone is selling to developer teams? And are you selling to the developers themselves, or are you selling to the kind of management level developer managers and so forth?
Selling to developers is a big challenge. Um, uh, if I have to give one advice to people who are running DevTools startups, first advice is probably don't. But there are ways to do it. So here's the different things that I've learned. So we sell mostly bottom up. The few conversations that I've had where we talk directly to somebody up the chain, they don't go anywhere, because they don't necessarily recognize the problems as problems. The people we sell to are usually somewhere like they're engineers almost always. Maybe they're staff engineers, but they're not usually like C levels. Now, so there's a couple of things. So the first thing, when you sell to engineers, unlike QA, now we are essentially a testing company. So you would think we sell to QA, but we don't, sadly, because QA tends to have money. Engineers, you would think engineers have money because they are paid so much. But that's not how it works. Engineers look at a product and think, well, I could build that. Why would I pay for it? Their estimates are wrong, obviously, but that's what they think. And so they will avoid purchasing it for the longest time. And I've done this too myself. I had some LinkedIn posts where I talked about where I bought a software, quite an expensive piece of software. But for the longest time, I thought I could just build it myself. Why would I pay somebody to do this? And so that's what I did. There's another way of looking at this. Now, realize that every engineer has an imposter syndrome, right? So when I was at Meta, for instance, for the longest time, I would think, why are they paying me this much? Like, I don't understand it. Like, am I really valued that much, right? So I guess that also affects how you think of developer tooling software, because you kind of think like, is spending that much money for a developer tool, which is saving me time, actually worth the company's money? Right? So there's all these different things that goes on in an engineer's mind, I think. And it shows up, right? Oftentimes when I'm selling, as I mentioned, we don't sell, we sell bottom up. So when we talk to an engineer, surprisingly, they will push back on price. But once it starts getting to procurement, nobody cares, right? We're not at the price point where there's going to be a lot of pushback from procurement. But as the engineers, before they have that conversations with somebody, they will try to make a comparison with some other tool, some other in the wrong context. And it's weird. It's like, yeah, this is not worth your time. I know that the price, once it goes to your procurement, they don't care. It's below their price point where they're just going to sign off on it. So yeah, so that's the thing. That's the problem with selling to engineers. Engineers don't know how to value their own time correctly, and their estimates are really off. And so they think that they can build something when they realistically can't and should not. And QA, obviously, if they need a tool, they know they can't build it, so they'll be like, okay, yeah, let's just go buy it. And so QA is a great place to sell things to. But sadly, our customer base is not QA right now, it's engineers. But here's the other benefit though. As engineers, one of the things, so when I was at Meta, our customers were consumers. And as an engineer, I did not understand consumers, right? So you know how Facebook has stickers. So when somebody was building the stickers tool in Facebook, I was like, well, who's going to use this? What's the point of this product, right? And obviously it blew up. So I don't understand users, but I do understand developers, right? We are developers, we understand developers. So we don't, so that little piece of friction makes your life like it just goes away, because you know what developers need, you understand them. So and that's a huge part of making a startup, trying to just understand your users. So it does save you that little headache, but in some sense you're taking the easy way out. But then it's challenging to sell, but it's fun. So again, you understand developers. I know what makes me happy as a developer. I can make another developer happy. As a small startup, I don't have too many engineers. I can just, show my fun code to, so it's fun to actually have conversations with actual engineers and, talk about coding, engineering related things to them. So it makes life fun as a small startup.
The sticker story is so fun. I can totally relate to that. When I saw it launch, I was like, I have no idea who's going to use this, but it doesn't mean that obviously the whole big population doesn't like something. So that's always something when you're building tools for others. Let's say I'm building for marketers. I know what they want, but I still get surprised by certain things for sure. Like you don't always expect that a small feature that you build is so valuable for a certain group of people, and yeah, you get surprised. But yeah, totally agree with the fact that if you're building for developers, it's gonna be really hard if you're not a developer yourself. Like if you're not really using those tools, really understand them deeply, it's going to be a tough job. So I guess that's one of the requirements when deciding to build a tool for developers, that if not everyone, but most of your team members are developers themselves and those tools pretty well. Now AI is a hot topic, so people are saying that why wouldn't I build this with AI? I got that today. But then on the other hand, your tool is great because of AI kind of increasing the speed of development, and you probably need those screenshots even more, like 10 times more than you needed in the past. It's so quick to develop features. But yeah, how do teams in your discussions, how do they talk about AI, that they can build with AI, they don't need you, or are they like, hey, I need you even more? What's the tone at the moment when you're approaching a new client?
I've definitely had the conversations where somebody's telling me that screenshot testing is a lot more valuable because of AI. Have I had people tell me that they can just build it with AI? People have told me that they can build it themselves. Look, I get it. They can definitely build like 80% of it. Like getting to 100% is obviously very challenging. I have a suspicion that is making people, I think it's just intuition. I don't have any data to back this up. I have a suspicion that AI is making engineers actually more cognizant of their value of their time. Even though AI makes things easier to build, I suspect that a very productive developer who is constantly doing interesting things does not want to waste time on a boring thing. But a developer who's not very productive may think, oh, well, I can build this myself because they don't have much else to do. That's my guess. I don't know if this is true. I'm trying to think of why I have this intuition. I think developers are starting to see how valuable, how much they can do with their time. You don't want to you never have this down period where you want to be doing some side project, basically. And so they don't want to spend time building a duplicated tool for themselves.
In my own business, I'm thinking that I'm not going to build any tools myself. Whatever I'm building today, it's not going to be relevant in 2 years' time, versus someone who's just like constantly focusing on that topic. Like I can't, like I'm reading a lot of LinkedIn posts saying that people are building their CRMs, and I say great thing, keep building. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, so I've got Attio. It costs me $0 per month because I'm just one person, free plan basically. I don't know why I would build a CRM for myself, and what would be the sort of like a inspiration source that why would I do it in the first place. But it's really interesting. It seems that everyone who's like actually building, they, just like you said, they understand the value of their time and what they could do if they would have more time, and they don't want to spend that with a sub task that is not related to the value that they can bring to their customers.
One more relevant point based off of this in the previous question. So developers are now very aware of a big spend that they're doing themselves on essentially a SaaS product, right? Which is their token costs. So I wonder if that will help people, especially if you're selling bottom up, it will help engineers realize that, okay, there is value to the products that we purchase as opposed to building in-house, because they see that spend basically. So I don't know, but that's just a intuition again. It's like I don't have any data to back that up.
Yeah, totally. At least it gives another monetary value, and you see those thousands and thousands spent on different tools today. So yeah, that's a great point. I haven't actually thought about it, but yeah, it definitely adds up, and it's kind of like one factor that you consider when building things. And there are even tools out there right now that are trying to kind of like help you drive down the cost. For example, make it more sort of like efficient for the model to find information. That can be like, code example somewhere, or it can be some sort of knowledge base or so. One of the things that when I was looking at your site, I noticed immediately that you're doing open source, and it's something that I've never done. I've always been curious, what would it be? But could you share a bit of background? Why did you decide to go open source? And yeah, what's the story behind that?
So I had like small contributions to a few different open source projects when I was younger. Then obviously it kind of stalled while I was doing bigger jobs. So yeah, so when I started working Screenshotbot, like initially I didn't get any customers. When you're starting a new startup, you want to validate things before you decide to move on. So it was hard to get the word out, figure out the marketing sales. So I figured, okay, well, you know what? I have nothing to lose. Right now, my choices are either stop this project and move to something else, or I can open source it and use that as one last way to validate things. Like depending on how many stars I get, that's kind of a validation. It tells me something about how much time I want to spend on it. And so that's the direction I went. I decided to open source. Actually, open sourcing a project is not that easy. It took me 2-3 months before I got to a point where I could open source it. So that in itself is quite a task. And once you open source it, it comes with maintenance commitments, because now you have your internal code, you have your open source code, they have to work with each other. There's a lot of headaches that come with it. But that's the direction we went. Was it beneficial? I think so. Our first big enterprise customer, this was before we had things like, SOC 2 compliance or ISO compliance. So they send us so for your viewers who don't really know how enterprise sales go, when you do an enterprise sales, Say, somebody on the enterprise security team has to vet your tool. So they look at your things like SOC 2 or ISO compliance, and they might send you a security questionnaire, and we have to convince them that okay, we're secure enough. And so when you have SOC 2 and ISO 27001, it kind of helps. But this was before all that, and this is a big name customer. I mean, I can name them for contractual reasons, but they're big enough that they do care about security. I do think the fact that we were open source contributed to the security guy saying, well, this looks good to me. And so we were able to get this first big customer before we got any certifications, which helped fund the certification processes. It's hard to be 100% sure, but I do think it helped. Does it help with the marketing process? I think it would have helped if we had like thousands of stars, but I think we're still niche that we don't have that. Like usually when you see, 10K stars on a GitHub project, you're like pretty sure that, okay, this is a pretty valid tool. We're in our star count is not that crazy. So it doesn't help too much in marketing in that sense. There have been a few big name companies that use the open source version temporarily. They are happy to have a conversation with us because even if they can't figure out procurement, they can still run the open source version. It's not happened a lot that somebody has done that. It has happened a few times, but at least it keeps a conversation going, which is sometimes hard in sales. So yeah, so it does help. It does come with extra maintenance burden, but I think it does help. Now, I have a suspicion though, that if you look at all products out there with their open source versions, open source alternatives, you'll almost always find that the open source alternatives are priced a lot lower than the non-open source version. So I do think that just the fact that you're open source brings down the value in your buyer's eyes quite a bit, which it should not be the case. It should be the opposite way. But I do think subconsciously, because people are probably looking at products and they see an open source one and they constantly see that the open source one is cheaper than the non-open source one, they're probably going to start thinking that open source generally means lower quality. I hope people don't think that, but I think that's what they think. So it does affect your pricing, and not just because they have the open source alternatives. It affects your pricing just because of the perception.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. You mentioned at the start that it took you 2 to 3 months to just like prepare for it. Could you share a bit more details? Like
mostly development related things. When you're building a tool where you are hosting it yourself and deploying it yourself, you can work with constraints, right? You can build a lot of constraints that are specific to your case, like tied to specific versions, will only run on Linux, only run on Debian 12. But the moment you start open sourcing things, you have to make sure that somebody can just run it somehow, right? Like even if they're not going to be a even if they may potentially be a customer, they may try running things running the open source version, and if it fails, they're going to have a bad perception of you, and then they're not going to become a paid customer. So you have to make sure that it kind of at least works. So yeah, so there's a lot of compatibility things. So Screenshotbot's written in Common Lisp. We were using a proprietary Common Lisp called Lispworks. But obviously, if you're open sourcing it, they have to be able to run it in an open source version of Common Lisp. So now we had to support both those two versions. It's mainly compatibility, and then making sure that there's, and the other thing is things like the equivalent of schema changes, right? When I'm running a schema change locally, I can, if I didn't have to care about open source, I mean, it's a lot easier because I don't have to keep backward compatibility with old schemas. Whereas the moment I do open source, I have to kind of make sure that somebody can run an old version and upgrade cleanly. That comes with a lot of maintenance headache, because now I have to have tests just to keep track of schema upgrades. Whereas without that, once I do the schema upgrade, I can forget about it, delete that code, right? On the other hand, though, it does help with cleaning up code, because especially if you're a small company, you're not thinking about how people look at your code. But the moment you start thinking about open source, you're opening yourself to judgment, which means you're a little more conscious about doing things correctly, doing things carefully, and that just does show up in the quality of your actual product too, I think. So it's in an indirect way, it does help with the product itself.
Yeah, definitely. You need to make some careful decisions because you can't kind of go like, oh, okay, now I decided to change the route completely. What are when you're now developing, are you kind of keeping them on par, or is it like, okay, the open source version has some limitations compared to your current product? How do you approach that?
So the way the code is structured is I have a monorepo with the whole thing. And I don't know if you've heard of a tool called a Copybara from Google. So the Copybara will copy a part of the monorepo into the open source. So the way the internal version works is it takes the whole open source code and augments it with a few extra things. For the most part, the open source, there's nothing you're removing from the open source that we're intentionally removing for any marketing reasons. We're not at a point where there's a lot of people using the open source that it's affecting um, the customers on our non-open source version. There are some things that are not there just because there's maintenance headache, or I just have to migrate over some code. But for the most part, every feature is there in the open source version. They may have to read through code to figure out how to enable certain things because not everything is fully 100% documented how you would do it, but most of the code is there. If somebody comes and asks me how do I enable this in the open source, I could probably write up a doc, basically.
Yeah, documentation is probably one of the extra benefits that you're gonna do in a bit more careful way than some others are doing it in the tech industry. So yeah,
That's true.
that's great. And yeah, it's always inspiring to hear how people are like approaching businesses in a quite different way. And like your story about the fact that you've been a open source contributor and kind of like following that already before it explains a lot why you are now running one yourself. So yeah, that's always great to hear. Before this, you were at Meta and Google. Why did you decide to go from a developer to a founder? That's probably something that our listeners are interested in.
I think I always had a founder mentality, I guess. So the main reason I left Meta was I felt I hit a wall as to how much I could grow. I could stay there for however long I wanted to, but there's probably no growth happening there. I've always been drawn to startups. So between Google and Meta, I was at a startup called Like a Little. So I did have the experience of being at a startup, and it was a fantastic experience. And I'd also been saving up money for it because I kind of knew in the back of my mind I wanted to do this eventually when the right idea comes along. And so when the moment happened, it's like, okay, you know what? I've been thinking about this for a while. Let's just go do it. Again, as I said, I was not trying to work on Screenshot, but I was trying to work on something completely different, which is probably more than I should have tried to do in a startup. Sometimes that's part of. I think that's part of the being the having the founder mentality where you're a little too overambitious. Right. So you think that you can do all of these things. Your mind's kind of wired in that way, in the sense that you're way more bold than you should be, really. It probably is also related to the open source thing. I like working on my own stuff. I like working in my own time. I like living a kind of, I know people say that startup life is very hectic, but that's not necessarily my life. It is hectic, but I also can choose when I wanted it to be hectic. And I like that freedom of choosing when I want to do things, when I want to be distracted and work on something that's completely pointless, or when I want to take a small vacation and go on a hiking trip. I like that flexibility, even though I don't mind a few days of, coding 16 hours straight. So I can handle both, basically.
I think being bold is the thing, like the idea of like going a bit too big. That's the one that carries you later as well, because it's like, I remember when we started this one that I'm currently building, and it felt like, okay, how come we're gonna be building this like just the two of us, or like me doing some sales and marketing and not really developing full time and so forth. And is this gonna be realistic? But then like that's the beauty of it. I think that's the thing that drives me as well. That is like no matter what, I'm just gonna try to build this, like you don't want to give up. And I think part of it is dreaming big and maybe bigger than what you can actually achieve straight away. Where can people find more information about the company and you? What's the best place to find you and get in touch if they want to start using Screenshotbot or just learn more about the topic?
All right, so Screenshotbot is at screenshotbot.io. You can email me at arnold@screenshotbot.io. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, and I'm happy to chat over whichever channel people want to talk with me to.
Awesome. Hey, thanks for joining this episode. And I'm sure that our listeners, people who are watching this, got a lot of value and kind of like feeling what it is to sell to developers, what it is to run an open source version of the business. And I'm really glad we had this discussion. But hey, thanks for joining. And yeah, all the best with Screenshotbot.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. It's always great to have these chats. I don't get to talk about these things every single day, so it's fun to talk about it.
Yeah, awesome. See you soon.
Cool. See you, Tony.